What does God-fearing mean in the culture and context of the Bible? It's not what you think. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. So when you translate one word from one language to another, it's a little complicated. And because you're not just translating a word, you're translating a concept. And the meanings of words evolve over time as what they're describing in a culture changes over time because the culture changes over time. We see all of that in this term God-fearing in the Bible. Not only is it bigger than the word fear in English, it also changes, its meaning changes over time as the cultural changes over time. So the meaning of God-fearing in the Old Testament is not the same as its meaning in the New Testament. We just don't have a single term or a pair of terms that mean the same thing in English as they do in Hebrew and Greek, because the concept is a lot bigger and more nuanced. And we also don't have the same cultural context, so that makes it a little complex. And I think in English, the part of this term that gets us the most confused is the term fear, because a lot of people use fear as synonymous or a particular nuance of being scared. And while there is an element of that in this term, God-fearing, it's really not about being scared. And really the root of the idea is the basic idea that you find in the Old Testament when we use this term God-fearing. It means people who worship God. And that also is a little bit more complex because the term worship is different. In modern religious cultures, people think of worship often as the thing that you do where you sing and listen to somebody talk. But worship in the Old Testament meant something bigger because their worship was different. In the Old Testament, worshiping God meant following all of the commands. And some of those were to have festivals and feasts, to go to a temple and to make sacrifices and to do like some form of worship. But it also meant the dietary practices and the way you planted your crops and the things that you wore. And so worshiping God was a bigger thing, and it actually involved a lot more practical actions in your everyday life than a lot of people think of worship today. So when I say that fearing God or being a God-fearer meant that they worshiped God, it meant that they followed the laws of the Torah and in their everyday life. It meant that they lived according to what God wanted them to do. That's also different because doing what God wanted you to do did not mean that you're just trying to be a good person and trying to live broadly by the morals. It was spelled out pretty clearly. Like I said, what you ate, what you wore, and of course the same things that you might think of today, how you treated poor people and how you acted in the world. So when you see that term, especially in the older parts of the Old Testament, it really just means Jewish people, God-fearers, the people who fear God. And they are often told to fear God, which means to obey the laws and to do the things that God has told them. And, there's this concept of the fear of God as the beginning of wisdom, which isn't like being scared of God. It means like the beginning of wisdom is doing the things that you're supposed to do, being the person that you're supposed to be. And once you're doing that, then you become wise as you live that out in the world. So in the Second Temple Judaism, somewhere kind of around the 4th century, there is a beginning of a migration of the term to a broader sense. In that moment, and all the way up really through when Jesus is around, there is, and after a little bit, there is this phenomenon of Gentiles, Romans, beginning to see value in the Jewish religion and forsaking the polytheism in favor of abiding by the laws of Judaism, but not converting to Judaism. And so you eventually see this term God-fearer refer to people, Gentiles, who are following Jewish law, who are worshiping Yahweh, doing all of that, and not converting to Judaism. So you have Jews and God-fearers or God-fearing Gentiles. And you can find this actually in the book of Acts, chapter 10, the story of Cornelius. Peter comes down from upstairs. Cornelius shows up, and the description of Cornelius is that he is a God-fearing man who is well thought of by the Jews, which indicates that he is sort of abiding by the law, and is one of these Gentiles who is following the Jewish faith without converting to Judaism. Then Peter goes to Cornelius, and there's this moment where a radical change happens, and he says, basically, anyone who fears God in any people, God accepts them. And this is the beginning of the Gentiles being incorporated into Christianity, and it moving from sort of a Jewish Reformation movement-ish to this bigger movement. It's also interesting, some scholars will credit the spread of Judaism throughout the Roman Empire and these these God-fearing Gentiles as a part of the thing that allowed Christianity to spread, because the idea of monotheism was beginning to take root, and the idea of this Jewish God was starting to be understood widely. And so when a group comes in with this bigger message and this way to be accepted without a lot of the problematic and onerous rules, it spreads easily. Well, not easily, but it spreads. So I got this question from somebody in our Not Church group. Not Church is this like community of people who are interested in God but not really sure about the rest of the thing. They want a spiritual community but not one that tells them they're going to hell because they don't believe all of the right things, or they've got a deck of tarot cards beside their table. And I think, and if you want to be part of that, links where the link things are. I think the question really was motivated by this modern usage where it says, like, you need to be a God-fearing person. So if you want to take the biblical idea and sort of make that belief into the modern day, being a God-fearing person would be living according to what you believe